what I am planning to do this PSIR classes is, let me tell you something, that I will be doing paper 1 section A regularly, and slowly I wanted to start paper 2 IR concepts for section B. So from Monday I will be thinking to start this, right? And I will be giving you some works every day so that you will be online with that concepts. At least by that point of time you don't feel that there are some lagging in the class, but otherwise it will be just like the classes will be very late. If you want to complete with this pace, it will continue for a long time. So rather I will start two sections. One section is this and another section is this, right? That is what I wanted to say. Let me go to this concept called Plato today, and let me complete this. Now Plato, the concept of philosopher king. Plato is the first feminist scholar, and Karl Popper's message that Plato is an enemy to open societies. We'll discuss about that, and then we'll understand, or we will complete the so-called this one that is called, we'll complete Plato as a philosopher. And last we have Plato is the father of political philosophy. That concept will be left. I'll discuss that also. Today I'll try to complete this. Now in my last class, if you do remember, I have started discussing about the so-called Plato's communism. And I said, what is Plato's communism versus modern communism? I said this difference, right? Today I'll continue with Plato's philosopher king here. Now, if you look at Plato's entire theory, already I discussed that Plato's entire theory will be focused on the state of ideal state. As a result, now an ideal state will be one state where people will be stationed as per their positions. In that stationing of their positions, you find the so-called philosopher class eligible to rule. Why the philosopher class will be eligible to rule? They have got the highest form of education, and the second thing is they also have this system called communism in order to eliminate any selfishness that might be still left with after having this education, right? That is what I discussed in my last class. Now let me go into this philosopher class. Now what Plato says is, until the philosophers are kings, or the kings have the power of philosophy, cities will never have rest from evils. Cities will never have rest from evils. Which means Plato is saying that either the cities has to be ruled by the kings, or to be ruled by the philosophers, or the philosophers has to be, or the rulers has to be philosophers. Rulers should learn philosophy. Then only the state will be good. Now why Plato give this theory of philosopher king? Now the root cause of, I said the root cause, Plato was a physician. Was telling the root cause, the root cause of all evils of Athens was ignorance. Was ignorance. Since rulers were ignorant, they could not do justice with their responsibility. As they are ignorant, couldn't do justice. Water they couldn't do justice with their responsibilities. As a result, as they couldn't do justice with responsibilities, they couldn't fulfill the aspirations of the citizens or the subjects, rather they are fulfilling their own appetite, that is called they are running after money. Running after money, as a result the entire system was corrupted, and that is the reason for the poor state of Athens. That is what he has said. 1 minute. Now, as philosophers, as the rulers are ignorant, as they are corrupt, he believed that rulers have to have knowledge. And as per Socrates, knowledge is a virtue. We already discussed. Knowledge is virtue. Hence, Plato believed that if Athens has to become an ideal state, it should be ruled by the philosopher who has this knowledge. Hence, Plato believed that if Athens has to be an ideal state, it can be achieved through philosopher king. This philosopher will have knowledge and he would be the man of reason. He would be the man of reason. Now, he says that a philosopher king will have certain features. A philosopher king will have certain features. Features of philosopher king of Plato. Philosopher king is the symbol of knowledge. He is the symbol of knowledge. And he is the symbol of sacrifice. We already discussed. They will not be ready for the seat, but they will be sacrificing. Third feature is they will have completed 50 years of education. Fourth feature is they do not possess family, private family and private property. And Plato gives absolute powers to philosopher. Absolute powers to philosopher king. What do I mean by absolute powers? There will be no limits upon the powers of philosopher. No limit upon the powers of philosopher king. No limit upon the powers of philosopher king. Now, Plato justifies this statement saying that a philosopher king should be given absolute powers. How he justifies? He says that a philosopher king should have absolute powers. Why he should have absolute powers is, why he has absolute powers is because he states this famous statement, for no law or ordinance is mightier than knowledge. Mightier than knowledge. జ్ఞానంతో కంపేర్ చేస్తే ఎటువంటి చట్టము ఎటువంటి ఆర్డినెన్స్ పెద్దది కాదు అని ఫిలాసఫర్ చెప్తాడు. మరి ఆ జ్ఞానం ఎవరికి ఉందంటే ఫిలాసఫర్స్ కింగ్స్కి ఉంది. కనుక ఫిలాసఫర్ కింగ్స్కి అబ్సల్యూట్ పవర్స్ ఇవ్వాలి అనేసి ప్లేటో యొక్క సిద్ధాంతం. సో ఫర్ నో లా ఆర్ ఆర్డినెన్స్ ఈజ్ మైటియర్ దెన్ knowledge. As a result, the philosopher should have absolute powers and there will be no limits. When I say absolute powers, there will be no limits on the powers of the philosopher king. This is another feature of this man. So what exactly does this statement mean? For no law or ordinance is mightier than knowledge. It means there is probability of asking this type of questions. For no law or ordinance is mightier than knowledge. What does this mean? This means that The philosopher king is neither limited by the book of law nor limited by public opinion nor limited by public opinion. పబ్లిక్ ఎలా చెప్తారు, పబ్లిక్ ఎలా చేస్తారు, అటువంటి ఒపీనియన్స్తో సంబంధం లేకుండా, ఏ బుక్కి సంబంధం లేకుండా ఎటువంటి పవర్స్ ఆయన్ని రెస్ట్రిక్ట్ చేయలేవు అనేసి అంటారు. neither limited by the book of law nor by public opinion. Now why he says so? Why? Because if you look at the modern day democracies, in democracy you have to go for public opinion, in democracies you have to follow constitution, which is a book of law. But he is saying that neither a book of law nor the public opinion cannot limit the powers of the king. Now what is the reason why philosopher king was given that much ultimate powers by Plato? The reasons are this. The first one is for no public opinion or no law, as I said, for no law or ordinance. Ordinance means public opinion here. Ordinance means public opinion. For no law or public opinion is mightier than knowledge. What does this mean? Now, he compares this with an analogy. What he says is, it is very foolish to limit the expert practitioner of medicine with the book of medicine. Now, if there is an expert practitioner to conduct something called surgery, now if you are asking him to read the book and conduct that surgery, this is very foolish because he knows much higher than this book. So what he says is, never limit the practitioner with his book. Why? Because why he compares that he is an expert practitioner? Philosophy king has already proven his ability. He has already proven his ability along with practical knowledge, practical experience. He already faced these practical experiences about knowledge. He knows everything. How he knows everything? For 50 years he has studied this thing. For 50 years he has experienced the reality. Now he has read every book. Now he knows what is correct, what exactly is fit, or what exactly is correct. Now, thus he says that he should be given absolute powers. Why? The philosopher king himself is an embodiment of knowledge. Embodiment of knowledge. And the philosopher king knows what is right and what is wrong. Thus, Plato gives absolute powers to the philosopher king. Thus, Plato gives absolute powers. Philosopher king అన్నీ తెలుసు, కరెక్ట్ ఏంటి, తప్పేంటి, ప్రాక్టికల్గా ఏం వర్క్ అవుతుంది, బుక్లో ఉండేదానికంటే ఎక్కువ తెలుసు కాబట్టి బుక్నే ఫాలో అవ్వడం ఫూలిష్ థింగ్ అనేసి చెప్తాడు. యాజ్ ఎ రిజల్ట్ he has no limitations. That is why the philosopher king should have absolute powers. So he is the symbol of knowledge, he is the symbol of sacrifice. With 50 years of education, he has everything. He do not possess family and private property, and he has experience. As a result, he shall have absolute powers. Why he shall have absolute powers? Because for no law or ordinance is mightier than knowledge, as for Plato. However, he has kept only one limitation of philosopher king. one limitation. He keeps one limitation on philosopher king. What is what one limitation? Philosopher king cannot change. He cannot change the constitution of the republic. The constitution of the republic. Philosopher king cannot change the constitution of the republic. What does this mean? Now Plato is making a distinction between the so-called constitutional law and ordinary law. Constitutional law and ordinary law. Why he says this constitutional law? Plato says that whatever the king has learnt is derived from constitutional law. And whatever the ordinary laws that is being made, they are made by the knowledge of the king or knowledge of the people. So they say that king will have almost equal powers or equal knowledge of constitution or constitutional law, but ordinary laws might be different. So he says that he keeps one limitation, that is the constitution of the republic. He cannot change the constitution of republic. Hence he says that a philosopher king is limited by constitutional law and he is not limited by ordinary law. In India also, the Parliament of India or Constitution Assembly function two-dimensionally. If you know this Constitution Assembly debates, the Constitution of India, the Assembly of Constitution, the Constitution Assembly functioned as a constitutional body as well as a legislative body. Ordinary legislative law making powers is known as ordinary law making power or legislative powers. If there is constitutional amendments as per Article 368 of Indian Constitution, that is called constitutional powers of the Parliament, right? So even India has these two things, constituent power and ordinary power, but the Parliament of India has both powers, constitution powers as well as ordinary powers. India can change, Parliament can change constitutional law as well as ordinary law. That is another thing, but this is the only limitation upon the so-called this fellow that is called Plato's philosopher king. Now this statement, now what is the central theme? Now this statement clearly proves that he is saying that philosopher king is absolute. Why philosopher king is absolute? Because he has absolute powers. And in the modern days, this is highly criticized. In the modern days, it is highly criticized. Why it is highly criticized in the modern days? It is a very well-known fact that power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. This was what his critics said. But what philosopher or Plato said is, there is nothing to worry about this corruption because there is no concept of corruption in a philosopher king. Philosopher king lo ituvanti concept em ledu. Power corrupts absolutely because absolute power corrupts absolutely ane concept. This reason work here because he is free from corruption. That is the reason why I have given him 50 years of education and why I have given the theory of communism. There is no private property, there is no family for him. As a result, corruption is not possible here. That is what he tries to say. But if you look at this absolute powers, one thing it is very visible is now Plato is saying that one person is having ultimate powers and this is called rule of one person, or he is promoting such thing called authoritarianism. Authoritarianism against the so-called public opinion, that is called democracy. In place of democracy, what Plato is propounding is rather than public opinion. You cannot limit the king with your public opinion. So he is going for authoritarian rule or one person rule rather than public opinion rule. As a result, this was uh, he is showing something called superiority of a person or authoritarianism rather than rule of law or public opinion. Rule of law or public opinion rather than rule of law or public opinion, he is showing authoritarianism, dictatorship. Guys, keep in mute mode. Public rule of law or public opinion, he is promoting dictatorship. This is the difference. So what is the critics? One critic is that he is promoting dictatorship over democracy. Plato again says why democracy is not a good thing. We'll discuss that in a while. But criticism of Plato's philosophy, criticism of his philosopher king, just like communism, his theory was criticized again by his disciple Aristotle. Aristotle criticized that Plato was very idealistic here and not pragmatic. And what Aristotle said is, it is very difficult to find, a philosopher king. It is very difficult to find a philosopher king. 50 years of education, because Aristotle already criticized his communism, right? Now he said that it is impossible to find a philosopher king who will study for 50 years, and anyhow communism is out of context, right? Now Aristotle also say that he is very doubtful about that he will not have corruption. There is nothing called this fellow will be free from corruption. Nothing will guarantee that he is going to be corruption. If Plato's ideal state is rule of philosopher king, this is what he said, ideal state of Plato. But Aristotle said the ideal state is the rule of polity. Ideal state is polity. What is polity? Polity means rule of law. He says that rule of one person is not an ideal state, but it is rule of law is ideal state. Right? How he justifies this, we'll study that in Aristotle's law. Now, one thing that you have to apprise Plato here is, Plato didn't confine this philosopher king only to the male counterparts. He extended this to females also. He didn't show discrimination here. That we have to appreciate as far as Plato's philosopher king is considered. Right? There is no difference between the so-called a male and the so-called a female here, but even he is not only propounding the so-called philosopher king, but he is also propounding one thing called the philosopher queen concept also. Philosopher queen. This is one thing which is extraordinary, and this shows that even in his ideal state, women could be the philosopher kings, queens, or even the queens can rule. This is something an egalitarian that he is showing as far as the ruling class is considered. So this is how he is saying that ideal state is a state which is ruled by philosopher king, whereas if it is ruled by the so-called the second class, that is called soldiers. If it is ruled by soldiers, this is not ideal state, but this is going to be one term called timocracy, Timocracy. If it is ruled by the soldier class, it is called timocracy. If it is ruled by the third class, that is called the producer class. In the producer class, the rich fellows ruling it, right? Then that is called oligarchy. Oligarchy. If it is ruled by all the people, if it is ruled by all the people like India, this is called democracy. That is all the people ruled by many ignorant people. So Plato says that if the rule is of ignorance, then that is called democracy. Now, only when there is an ideal state, only when philosopher king, the wisdom or knowledgeable person is ruling, then only he says that you will have something called uh, a state which is free from corruption. Otherwise, the states will be full with corruption. However, there is criticism. So, what you have to write as far as Plato's philosopher king is considered, you have to write the context on which Plato's philosophy. So, again, I said in the answer writing, I said you have to start with context, right? What is the context on which he is speaking? Again, he wanted to have an ideal state. For that, he is speaking. Now, how he is going to establish an ideal state through the philosopher king? Now, why he has proposed that philosopher king, that is the thing that you have to write. This is context. And then what are the features of Plato's philosopher king? You have to write absolute powers to the philosopher king. Now, why he has given absolute powers to the philosopher king? And then you have to write what is the limitation on philosopher king. And then you have to write Plato's egalitarianism as far as the rule is considered. And then criticism by Aristotle. You have to write these things. And Plato says a classification of the states as per Plato is this. This is what Plato's